Lethality indicators provides law enforcement with the best opportunity to predict future increasingly violent patterns of conduct with offenders. When you take an offender's past conduct and you combine that with their current pattern of conduct, you are able to ascertain, or at least attempt to predict, moving forward what their future violent pattern of conduct may be. When you combine high lethality indicators with a loss of conduct inhibitors, you are now in a high lethality moment of opportunity. You and the victim must both be aware that a domestic violence related homicide is most likely to occur during these times. So remember, mentally reset, choose to engage, and understand that when you gain the trust of the victim, you've got the best opportunity to effect real change and real difference at that scene.
That lethality situation really involves a historical and pretty much a deep line of questioning, much more so than officers are used to in a domestic violence call. I think that when you talk about lethality factors, there can be no preconceived notions. You have to take it at face value in terms of what the victim is saying, but also what the victim isn't saying.
So what dangers does the law enforcement officer see? What dangers does the victim report? And how much does that affect that victim's potential lethality?
As you go into a secondary line of questioning, again, when you have separation and more time, most people ask the obvious. Past history is usually a good indication of future behavior. Has there been violence? Has he hit you before? Do you have previous injuries? And again, an examination of these type of injuries. In some cases, victims may disclose previous broken bones, hospital visits. They may have signs of scarring, things like that, covering up bruises with makeup, things like that, that would show that this isn't a first time, which may or may not discredit statements being made by the alleged offender in the case. When you're trying to identify a primary aggressor, these are key factors not only for the investigation, but again for lethality assessment. She may talk about the control factors. He always has to know where I'm at. He won't let me have a cell phone. He follows me around. He's very jealous. Those kind of factors. The statements he's made. If I can't have you, no one can. If you ever leave me, we'll meet in heaven. Those kind of things. Those kind of subtle statements are high lethality factors. And when you put these all together, in and of themselves, they may not seem that significant, but in totality, they may rise to one of the highest level of threats where you may be in the 11th hour before this could have been a situation that could have resulted in a fatality. There are sometimes trigger factors that can determine lethality. Say recent events. There may be an anniversary of a death in the family for this individual. There may be situations where they've lost a job, something that cause other situations, other stress in the household.
One of the biggest indicator of lethality, though, if you walk into a domestic violence situation, will be whether or not the victim has recently separated from the perpetrator, whether she's moved out or she kicked him out and he's come back, whether or not she's filed for divorce, filed a parentage case, or filed for an order of protection. That is probably the highest indicator of lethality. When a woman and her children are most at risk, ironically enough, is when she leaves the situation and where the perpetrator's control has been threatened. So if she's told you, he came over and beat me up, I kicked him out 2 weeks ago and he came back, that's when you really have to be concerned for her safety. If there is an order of protection, you have to look as whether or not you can arrest for a violation of the order. If she doesn't have an order of protection, that might be where the information she needs to get right now is how to get an order of protection. But a recent separation is probably the #1 indicator of lethality. And that means sitting down and asking, what's your situation right now? Did you tell him tonight you're going to file for divorce? Did he move out 2 weeks ago? And that's why getting information about more than just whether he punched you tonight is vital for law enforcement to understand the full situation.
And again, stalking behaviors of any kind are usually indications that the offender has elevated his response to the situation. He's trying to take control. He's trying to save face. You know, it can be just an emotional situation for him, but you know, you challenge people's manhood or machismo in some cases, they don't care, and that becomes, anything else in their life becomes, you know, second nature. Is they're going to save face first, and those are the worst case scenarios that result in a murder-suicide. We've looked at text messages sometimes that the victim didn't see as being harmful, but it actually was definitely a threat. And you know, if we see that, and again, putting it together with a total lethality package, we're able to see sometimes just how close the offender is to committing an act of violence.
Looking at the specific risk factors that each victim faces is a critical piece, both for the victim being aware of her own level of danger and how to plan for her safety, and also for successful prosecution of the case. Because if law enforcement can accurately document the level of danger there, the more likely it is that a prosecutor is going to be able to make the case that this is something that needs to be addressed through the judicial system and hopefully get a solid conviction before it escalates to a more serious crime.
Strangulation, if you think about it, is the ultimate exercise of power and control. You are cutting off someone's life force. And victims can report different things. Very few victims call it strangulation, they'll call it choking.
First of all, it's really important to understand that a woman is not going to declare to an officer, "I've been strangled." She may say, "I was choked," but she's probably not going to use the term strangled. But strangulation is extremely dangerous and can lead to problems not only at the time of the event, but also even up to a day and a half later. Strangulation is when sufficient force is applied to the neck to occlude or cut off the blood supply to the carotid arteries that carry blood to the brain. Strangulation can damage not only the arteries, but the soft tissues of the neck, the hyoid bone that supports the tongue, and the trachea. It only takes about 11 pounds of pressure for 10 seconds to occlude the carotid and lead to unconsciousness.
50 seconds of not being able to breathe could result into a situation where somebody actually goes into a coma and may die. There could be other injuries that also occur from strangulation, and strangulation in some cases can be viewed as attempt murder. And again, if the officer looks at it as, well, it's not that serious, in some terms they're missing a very, very key threat assessment or lethality factor that exists. Strangulation is probably one of the most violent acts that an offender can commit in a domestic violence situation, short of using a weapon on the victim. And I think officers have to be aware of that. From a medical standpoint, there may be some signs that the officer sees there that even if the victim isn't saying it. There's certain types of capillary breakage and stuff that causes what's called petechia in the eyes. But if you miss it and you treat it as, say, oh, it's just a misdemeanor, there was just some pushing or holding and he was just trying to keep the person at bay, they're missing the fact that they may be one step away from being a homicidal situation. After the violence, a lot of times the offender can be repentant. He can be expressed that he's sorry for the situation of the victim, and he tries to do certain things to make up for his behavior to let her know that it's all right. And she's already in a sense of, she's desensitized because of the situation, so any kind act, taking somebody out to dinner, leaving a flower, a rose, a card, things like that can be misconstrued to be that things are going to be all right, things are going to change and for the better. And in reality, they could be the clue that things are getting worse.
Talk with the victim, empathize, and then start working on giving her the information she needs while you're getting the information you need to do a complete report, and establish probable cause for any of the things that might have happened that night, whether it's criminal damage to property, interference with communications, false imprisonment, child abuse because a child was present, or if there are, as you said, an indication that quite possibly there might be a felony committed because of the strangulation.
domestic violence is probably one of that in terms of domestic violence homicides, is one of the few homicides that we probably have an early chance and early recognition that we could prevent if we take the time to be thorough, if we take the time to develop a rapport with the victim and get a true understanding of what is really going on in these situations.
Traditionally, law enforcement is geared to be reactionary in general to most types of crimes. When you're dealing with domestic violence situations, especially those that are leaning towards a high lethality index, you really need to be proactive. And lethality assessment provide law enforcement with one of the best tools available to predict and have the best opportunity to prevent future high lethality events. And this is really where best practice comes into play.